When going home, I took a slower pace. As I entered commerce, I decided to circle the planet. I came into the atmosphere at the northern pole and was intrigued by the polar ice. Gigantic glaciers were calving, most the size of small islands. Afterward, I headed crossed the Northern Ocean, which changed from frozen to tropical waters. I dropped close to the water and created a wake, spraying at least 75 feet into the air. I couldn't help myself. Once across the ocean, I came upon an imposing expanse of desert. While crossing, I flew over several oases as I passed over the hot sand. I considered stopping at one when I spotted a large building up ahead. It turned out to be one of the many libraries throughout Sierra. Did I mention I love libraries? Hundreds of libraries were erected in various harsh climates throughout Sierra. This one sat in the heart of the desert. The goal was to make them look ancient or abandoned. I continued right to the library instead of stopping. This one was surrounded by pools, cactus, and palm trees. The building itself was in the form of Greek architecture. All the libraries were built in the Greek form and similar to one another. From the air, they looked like six-legged octopuses. Each one had a center dome 1/2 mile in circumference. From the dome, 6 legs, or halls, extended out over 1/2 mile in 6 different directions, and each hall was 100 feet wide. Skylights ran down the middle of the ceiling, from one end of the hall to the other, ending at the center dome. The skylights added a pleasant natural light throughout the halls. The exterior walls were composed of gray granite blocks with 12 doorways cut into each wall, placed evenly along the length of each side. A porch circled the whole exterior of the complex, and was constructed of Corstan granite, 16 feet wide, with 15 steps leading to the ground. Exquisitely carved marble Corinthian columns lined the outer edge, set 15 feet apart. They reinforced the upper roof over the porch. The top or roof of each hall was dressed with fountains, gardens, and small trees. Also, small sitting areas were distributed around, each joined by narrow tile walkways. The roof of each hall was held up by massive cedar beams, from cedar, with a stone platform set up top supporting the gardens, fountains, and small buildings. The interior ceiling displayed natural woodwork featuring those cedar beams. 4 of the halls were libraries, and down the center of each stood 14-foot-high, dark walnut, bookcases placed from one end to the other. Each hall had 6 rows of the bookcases, with 8-foot aisles in between each of them. 21-foot aisles were on either side between the outer bookcases and the exterior wall. Every 75 feet opened to a 25-foot space in which one could sit, converse, read, and study. The 4 halls included a second story with a walkway and banister going the full length of the right side of the hall. 12 sets of stairs, up against the outer wall, led up to the second floor. Small rooms were built up there where people could find a secluded place to read, relax, or spend the night if desired. Often, visiting authors stayed in the rooms when they came to read their works to the public. The floors of each hall had a different species of wood flooring. The one I entered was laid with stained and polished wide mahogany planks, set in various patterns throughout the hall. I noticed the place smelled of old books, and dry wood. The scent screamed of history. As an added touch, a small chamber was placed at the end of each hall where one could get something to drink, such as coffee, tea, soda, or whatever desired. You can pick up a tasty smoothie there. I like the mango coconut smoothie myself. The other 2 halls contained museums. One was an art museum that contained modern-day paintings and sculptures, the traditional stuff one might encounter in an art museum. I searched for pieces of John's artwork in the art museum, but found nothing. Many of the carvers displayed their works in those museums. Not one artist who lived before the millennium could match the painting or sculpting talents of the contemporary ones. I remembered in the past devoting hours looking at a single masterpiece. The other hall was an adventurer museum. Because of Jesse's and my trip to the small tavern Cupumzica, I was eager to look around the adventurer museum. So, I put in a couple hours there picking out 2 books to read and a video to watch at a later time. I suspected I had hundreds of books and videos of Jesse's quests, although I didn't remember at the moment. I eventually made my way around the whole complex. Afterward I stopped to get half a dozen tacos in one of the small restaurants in the dome. Kids, on a field trip, raced around making every kind of kid noise. I watched to see if anyone would seize jurisdiction, but no one did. I guess they showed up to hear a writer read one of her children's books, titled, A Day on the Floating Mountains. How curious, what a nice title, I thought. I stayed the night because I was fortunate enough to find an available room. So, I picked out a Bible to read Genesis before I fell asleep. I knew it by heart, but I always get a warm feeling sitting, enjoying a cup of coffee while reading God's letter to mankind, and I will never tire of it. Thank you, Father, I said as I passed out. I slept in the next morning. First thing after getting up, I entered the dome to have breakfast, eggs, bacon, hash browns, and a cool glass of orange juice, which took me back to the farm, and Alex. I wandered around and chatted with a few of the curators. As I got ready to leave, I overheard an author, I assumed he was more of a reader than an author, refer to the book he planned to read. It arrested my attention. Robinson Crusoe was one of my favorite books. Already, a group of people were sitting around waiting on him. Now, he had my curiosity. So, I listened for a while before I left. As he recited, something strange happened. Because of the manner in which he read the book, so vivid, it was like I was there. I anticipated every word, every emotion Crusoe had, being overwhelmed by the loneliness and the fear he experienced, all read in such an archaic language. Before I knew it, it was late afternoon before he finished the book. Afterward, others around me discussed the story. One had this point of view. Another had a different impression. I said to myself, well, this isn't me. I became hungry again. So, I got up, thanked him for the story, and advanced to the taco stand to get a few more tacos to eat on the way home. What a splendid story, and how the reader brought you into it was incredible. I will have to do it again soon. I called for and boarded Louis to go home. After arriving home I spent the rest of the afternoon with paper and pen on the beach, writing. I put down my thoughts while going over, in my mind, everything that has transpired and why. As I was submitting it to paper, I felt sad, which made little sense. Even after spending 2 weeks with Sophie, I already missed my kids. I longed for them. That evening Jack came over and we had a terrific meal of tropical fruit. It was refreshing and exactly right. Afterward, we sat around talking. Dana and Bart joined us, which was odd. I began the conversation. I figure I've been here in Sierra for at least 11 months now. It has been like one long vacation for me, seeing a world I could never imagine. Although what I have realized, and most significant, is that I could have spent a lifetime in any one of those places I have seen or visited. I am overwhelmed by the thought of doing so. Then, I named people I had not seen since coming here, like my brothers and sisters, or my pastor, Br. White. I thought for sure I would see him. Also, I was concerned for my best friend Reyes. Where is he? They're busy elsewhere, Jack replied. What an interesting comment. I pressed and Jack told me my brother Gary lived on a 100-square-mile ranch in one of the other regions of space. He called the name of his ranch the Flying Blue Horse Bed and Breakfast. Jack mused. I thought it was an unusual name. No, that's what I expected, I said, laughing. I guess there were 2 ranchers in the family. Br. White was active in Alaska and British Columbia supervising a restoration project. Jack told me I visited him and Margaret often. I was happy about that. Then, he told me Reyes was leading a development project in California. I said, he is probably rebuilding LA. He was still being ambiguous, and I had no clue what he meant by anything he said. Well, Gary, Reyes, and others needed protection from your constant interrogation, Jeff. Not everyone would resist and you would figure out things you shouldn't, he argued. What did it matter? If I asked the wrong question, I would not understand a thing they told me anyway, I retorted. Jack laughed and told me again the future wasn't set in stone, and will be kept that way. Sierra was only a possibility or probability, not an absolute. He told me not to mention the rest of my family and friends. I was not there for that purpose. For some, I only feared they did not survive as believers. Yet, I hoped that wasn't the case, and I relied on that hope, hoping most of them remained true to Christ. Besides, I took comfort in the fact nothing was set in stone and there was still opportunity for any of them who continued to sit on the fence. I changed the subject. I have loved everything I've done while here, particularly all the traveling. Jack responded, "It only makes sense, Jeff. You are, after all, a watcher, and watchers travel, which is part of our responsibility." Then, Jack said, "Just remember, Jeff, you've been given pertinent memories covering the last 200 years of life in Sierra. As you already figured out, the purpose for those memories was to establish a foundation for the story you must tell. Don't forget. Imagine, Jeff, if you came here for only a limited period, and left right afterward, you would only remember it as a dream in the night, and soon after forget the seriousness of telling others. For that reason, God provided you a lifetime of experiences with the memories for the foundation to your story. Jeff, the message is this: the world will one day become this world, and it's accessible to anyone who desires to live here, but there is a cost, which isn't a cost at all, but a trust, or a faith in Christ. He is the answer and the reason this exists. He died so we could live in heaven. So, you can live in Sierra, which is not only a place, it is a true peace of mind. Here, everyone lives with no uncertainties or fears. Unlike the world you are going back to where turmoil is around every corner. People are living in fear, and for good reason. The worst time in human history is just around the corner. People need hope, Jeff. Even if you only persuade one person with hope, it will be worthwhile, you will see. You must include all of your experiences in the story. That is why you are here. Okay, I understand. But I thought I should have had an enlightened moment, an epiphany to help me do so, to inspire me, I responded. Jack continued, Jeff, I am sure the moment will come. I assume the moment will present itself when it does. The conversation was taking a turn, reminding me of an exit interview for leaving a job, or finishing up an audit. I was getting a sense of something extraordinary happening, as if we were saying goodbye. Now, I was too curious. So, I had to say I was wondering how much longer I would be around. No one had a clue. Dana asked if I gave up on Christ, would she exist in this future? Her question put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, not to mention how profound a question for a companion. No one had the answer to that question either. I said I was not the only reason Sierra exists. I am sure someone would imagine an equally important idea. The angels created the companions, not mankind. So, I suspect they might build them regardless if I came here or not. I told her I was not planning on giving up. So, there's no need for her to worry. She laughed. Honestly, I am only circuits and energy. If I were not to exist, it would have no relevance on anything. It does to me. It most assuredly does, I said. I turned to Jack, feeling a compulsion to say goodbye. But instead I asked this question: who wrote the notebook? Jack reached down to his side, picked up and handed me the notebook. I assumed it had disappeared. Jeff, open it, he replied. I opened it to discover that the pages which had changed to the foreign language now contained the diary I have been keeping since coming here. It felt like I had just discovered Alibaba's golden treasure. I was the author of the notebook. Now, I knew my time. My life in Sierra was concluding. The minute I looked up from the notebook, I felt a profound sense of fatigue. I passed out in my chair. The room and everyone in it disappeared, their voices withered into silence. I opened my eyes and discovered myself sitting in a wheelchair, in a hall with drab white walls dressed with yellow stains. The place stank of yeast. I couldn't move any part of my body except my head. My arms laid helpless on the armrest. I glanced down at my legs, which appeared to be merely skin and bone, and I saw I had been drooling on them. I struggled to move, but I couldn't even adjust them in the wheelchair. Others surrounded me, everyone in the same situation as I. An elderly woman was across from me struggling to set a record on an antique record player. She couldn't get it to play. Two orderlies came into the room. When I saw them, I understood I was in an old folks' home. Both orderlies looked out of place, being so young with a certain radiance around them. I testify it looked as if one of them had wings underneath his shirt. They fidgeted with the player for several minutes trying to get it to play. One of them looked in the back to find the power cord had come loose. He used a screwdriver to tighten up the connection. Afterward, the other placed the record on the turntable and started the player. At first, the record sounded annoying and scratchy, like an old poor-quality AM radio. I observed as the old woman tapped her finger on the armrest of her wheelchair. She did nothing other than tap her finger, but I could not turn away. I noticed her feet began moving, one then the other. She raised her head and arched it back and picked up her arms over her head like a swan preparing to take flight. Her moves resembled a ballet dancer. All the while the music became softer and distinct. Others around me didn't even notice. I wondered why they hadn't reacted to what I was seeing. The walls of the hall turned dark brown and deteriorated into blackness. With exception of the old woman, every soul around me faded into the blackness. A brightness surrounded her body and above her head as she moved her hands. As she swung them, streams of light followed, blue, green, white and golden traces of light. She rose and was no longer an old woman. She was beautifully middle-aged. Her feet glided across the floor. A golden light accompanied her, reaching from her, drawing her body. With each step she became younger until she became a child. The blackness turned into a blue sky laced with white clouds. She now flowed more like a bird in flight. The music had become melodic, enchanting. It became a brilliant symphony of sound and movement. The woman danced with such elegance as if she was the music, and I watched as I remained confined to my wheelchair. I don't know how long she danced as I was so captivated I lost track of time, uncertain if there was time. While I watched, the music faded, but she continued to move. She turned and looked right at me with the countenance of an angel. In the revealing silence she said, "I call this dance born again." It could not have been clearer. Immediately after the woman told me that, I found the strength to stand. As I did, I found myself on the beach standing before the beast. This time, I was the young man. The creature picked me up and flung me onto the beach. I recalled the dancer and the other young man. I stood up and yelled at the beast, "I will live. You will not defeat me." I ran at him and he at me. I hit him so hard we both sailed through the air. Next thing, I came to rest lying in a field of tall grass. I looked up to see several people hovering over me. Not feeling any pain, I sat up like nothing was wrong, except for a pair of scraped knees. The people standing around me struggled to make me lay back down, but I refused and wasn't having any of it. I looked up the hill towards my car. There it sat, crushed and pushed upon the sidewalk. An ambulance had just arrived. It carted me off to the nearest hospital. As the doctor checked me out, he kept rattling his head. I asked, "What's wrong, doc?" He paused, looked at me, and explained, "Well, it doesn't appear there is anything wrong with you other than two skinned knees. I would have expected someone who had been through an accident like you did to be going to the morgue rather than the hospital. You appear to be otherwise unscathed, but I want to keep you overnight in case we missed anything." "Okay, if you think it's best," I replied. I sat back in the bed as they wheeled me down to a room which had another patient in it. That patient's curtains were closed, and they were quiet. My kids came into the room, each one had many questions. When the interrogation was over, I told them of my adventure, and everything that happened during the brief moment before landing in the field. I must have talked for 2 hours. They stared at each other and maintained. He must have bumped his head hard. I think one of them asked the doctor if they might want to keep me more than just overnight. I knew it was real. The whole time I spent there should have ended with an earth-moving revelation, but it didn't, I said as I recalled the dancer. I continued, "It will doubtless take me some time to figure it out. All of them said how grateful they were it wasn't anything worse and I should consider both directions before driving through an intersection. Now, it was getting late so everyone had to go home. The room fell quiet, yet my mind was restless as the old woman's music played in my head. After a short while, right before I fell asleep, a voice called out. "Hey," it came. I hesitated before responding as I was tired, and already half asleep. If I responded, I would have a hard time going to sleep. Yet, the tone of his voice tugged at my heart. So, I reacted with "Hey, how are you?" "Not so good. I am dying of cancer and only have a few days, perhaps hours left," he said. I was taken back and said, "I am sorry." Then, he said, "So am I. So am I. I overheard your story. It sounded so real." Then he asked, "Was it real?" "Yes. It was real to me." Then, I considered more urgent things. I said, "It was more about a person than a place." "I kind of gathered that," he replied. "Please tell me more. You sounded so full of hope." "I have no hope, for today or the future," he moaned. I asked him, "Why?" "My wife and children died over 20 years ago in a car accident. They were Christians like you. They attended church every Sunday and prayed all the time. I didn't believe too much of what my wife had to say. Our life was happy as long as she didn't force her opinions on me. I am sorry for not believing her now and full of regret," he said and paused. "I know that kind of loss is a tough thing to live with," I replied. Then he complained, "It made no sense because if God was so good, why did he take my family away from me?" I told him, "I am so sorry, and I understand the pain of loss. My son died tragically within a month of his 15th birthday. He confessed, I got mad and gave up on life. I have been living on the streets since." He coughed for a couple minutes. Then he asked, "I couldn't bear the loss. How did you survive?" "It was difficult," I replied. "I got mad at God too for several years." I understood how he felt. My heart reached out to the man. I got up to pull back his curtain which separated us, to get a look at him face to face. He was younger than I yet. His illness had caused him to appear much older than he was. I could tell he was dying. I took a chair. He said, "There was something in your story that affected me deep inside." He paused again to cough and then continued, "Before you finished, I realized I needed hope. Your story gave me hope as if you spoke directly to me." "The story is about Christ, as much as it's about heaven," I replied. I asked him, "You said your wife was a Christian. Did you ever consider at any time during your marriage your own salvation?" "No, but I would like to right now. I know there is no guarantee for tomorrow, and my time is short," he stated as he looked into my eyes, and then asked desperately, "Tell me, how do I live? How do I find the hope you shared in your story?" I immediately visualized the young man on the beach defeating that beast. This man had lived a tough and sorrowful life. He had been beaten down for years, for decades. Thankfully, after everything he'd been through, in the end he wanted to live. I knew he would defeat the beast in his life and live. We talked about how each of us have sinned against God, how we needed to repent of those sins. I told him he needed to call upon Jesus to be his Lord and Savior. We prayed as he turned his life over to Christ. There was a particular brightness, and a certain light that came on in his eyes afterward. We continued to talk for a while. I answered whatever questions I could, ones he needed to hear. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I am so exhausted." I said good night and returned to my bed to lie down. I eventually fell asleep only to be woken by the sound of alarms coming from his bedside. While attending to him, the doctors and nurses were discussing why I was in the room. It was the wrong room. I was supposed to be in the room next door. While they were deliberating their error, the man next to me succumbed to his illness. I heard them pronounce him 6 minutes after 3 am. I was happy we had talked about salvation, but I forgot one significant thing, to ask his name. It never came up. It didn't seem important. How could I be so careless? So, I asked the nurse who was closest to me, What was his name? Could you please tell me? Mr. Stevens was his name, she replied. Jack Stevens. She must have caught my expression because she followed up by asking me, did you know him? That was the moment. The end, perhaps the beginning. The end, perhaps the beginning. The end, perhaps the beginning.